In more than a decade of producing The Listening Post, we have often examined the ways in which the news media have grown into essential components of political debates. Take the UK, for example, where Jeremy Corbyn leads the biggest political party in terms of membership in Western Europe. His supporters say the corporate media, primarily in the print sector, are out to smear him, plain and simple, since his left-wing policies are a threat to the establishment that they represent. It's a contention his critics reject outright. Amidst all the mudslinging, Corbyn has willingly waded into the fray with some proposals that, should he ever come to power, would change the rules of the media game in Britain. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on the debate around Jeremy Corbyn, his ideas for altering publicly owned broadcasting, siphoning money from some tech giants and directing it to the BBC, and curbing the power of media conglomerates.
They shouted coward at you this afternoon.
But why do you think you and Trump have no appeal to the young?
Well, I don't think...
I disagree
Why?
with that. And
Why?
the evidence is...
British politicians are rarely given an easy ride by the media, and that's for good reason. But for Jeremy Corbyn, the ride has been particularly rough.
So your future as Labour leader is absolutely intact. You've not considered for a moment whether you as leader are damaging the party's
I'm really
chance.
surprised the BBC is reporting fake news.
In 2015, Corbyn was elected leader of Britain's opposition party, the Labour Party. And in the 3 years since, much of the British news coverage has often ridiculed, caricatured and demonised him and his policies.
Here's the thing about the media representations or misrepresentations of Jeremy Corbyn, is that they're not particularly consistent. So 1 minute he's a dangerous terrorist sympathiser. On the other hand, he's portrayed as ineffectual, as a pacifist, a vegetarian leaf eater, a bit of a herbivore.
Whether a result of negative coverage or not, Corbyn has long held ideas about the media, how to rethink it, how to restructure it.
Our media, in many cases, is failing. Now, this isn't just the view of someone who has had, shall we say, an interesting relationship with the media, particularly over the last 3 years.
A few months back, Corbyn was invited to speak at one of the British media's key industry events, the Edinburgh Television Festival. And he used that platform to launch his vision for the future of journalism. On the national public broadcaster, the BBC, Corbyn had a few ideas on how it's funded and how it should be governed. Currently, the broadcaster's board members are appointed in part by the government and the rest selected by BBC senior management. Corbyn wants to make this more democratic. He said that the public, whose taxes pay for the broadcaster, as well as BBC employees, should be the ones who choose the board.
He has this view that to depoliticise the BBC, it would be a good idea to have some form of elected officials at the top of the organisation. It's one of those things that seems like a very nice idea in theory, but if you create a system whereby some sort of non-executive board are elected, the next step to having elections is to turn them into sort of a plaything for political parties. So far from depoliticising the BBC, it seems to me that actually holding elections to determine who has a say in how it operates is the very thing that would make it highly politicised.
And when it comes to diversity, Corbyn called for full transparency about who works at the broadcaster, not just in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of class too.
So here's the thing about England. Only 7% of UK school children go to private schools, and yet if you have this private school background, you are more likely to get top jobs in the media. Look at the Grenfell tragedy that happened in 2017. Residents of Grenfell have been trying to reach out to media saying, look, we are being left in unsafe accommodation and we're worried that it's going to take a tragedy, a fatal tragedy, to get people to listen. These are the people who are shut out of newsrooms, and they're also the same people who might be plugged into stories, into communities that more privileged people just can't reach. That's a grave failing of the media establishment.
Corbyn's rise to prominence comes as a surprise to many, but his appeal, a left-leaning socialist politics of yestercentury, resonates when it comes to current debates on the rise of unregulated tech giants.
The public realm doesn't have to sit back and watch as a few megatech corporations hoovered up digital rights, assets, and ultimately our money.
The UK media, its broadcasters and its newspapers, are suffering as big tech sucks the life and money out of them. So, like many others, Corbyn is calling for them to be reined in, taxed more. But he's gone further. He says the proceeds from that tax should fund public broadcasting, as well as cash-strapped investigative journalism and local media.
The suggestion that tech giants and so-called platform monopolies should make a financial contribution to subsidise news in the public interest is actually not at all radical. There's been a long-standing precedent in media policy making that there are some aspects of the media that are not profitable, that are not even necessarily commercially viable, but are absolutely essential to the public interest and to reinforcing democracy.
The British media is dominated by a handful of powerful conglomerates. Just 3 companies control 71% of the national newspaper market. Top of that list is Rupert Murdoch's News UK, housed in the building right behind me. News UK owns The Sun, Britain's biggest selling paper, as well as The Sun on Sunday, The Times and The Sunday Times. It also used to own the News of the World, but that paper was shut down after revelations that journalists there had been hacking the phone of murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler.
That scandal led to a 2-part Leveson inquiry. The first part called for a state-backed press regulator that all newspapers would have to sign up to or face the consequences. The Conservative government rejected it. The second part would have got at the relationship between newspapers and the police. In March of this year, the government abandoned it. Corbyn wants to recall Leveson, to hold the media to account for past crimes, and to push for future regulation.
I think media ownership in particular is strong ground for Corbyn and for Labour. It taps into the broader attack that Corbyn has been making on capitalism. But I think it also plays to the notion that there has been a closeness between the Conservative Party in particular and the media barons, which for Jeremy Corbyn is something very much to push against, given that he sees himself as very much the man of the people.
Jeremy Corbyn, are you an anti-Semite?
No.
That pushback has become an increasingly Sisyphean task for Corbyn. His speech came at the height of a story that had been hitting the headlines week in, week out. Accusations of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, often targeting the leader himself.
Mr. Corbyn, what are you going to do about the perceived anti-Semitism in your party? Mr. Corbyn, have you got any comment?
This month, a study produced by the Media Reform Coalition took a close look at some 250 articles and broadcast news clips covering the anti-Semitism story. More than 90 of them were found to be either misleading or inaccurate.
What we have seen across the national press, and largely echoed in broadcasters, is something that I think is truly unprecedented. And that's not so much in the kind of critical stance that they have taken towards Corbyn and the policy platforms that he represents, but just in what we know from research that we've produced. There's been a systematic subversion of basic journalistic news values.
When Jeremy Corbyn ran to become Labour's leader, he triggered the biggest party membership surge in British history. Media across the country hadn't seen him coming. They discounted him, dismissed him.
Jeremy Corbyn.
And 3 years in, the media are still grappling with how to deal with him and the revival of the socialist politics that he has inspired. A politics which for Corbyn must involve a radical overhaul, a structural reform of the media itself.